So today is Vision Sunday, which leading up to today we've explained is a time for the elders to try to articulate where we feel like God is taking us as a church. If this is your first time here, I feel like I should just make a brief comment that the sermon today is a little bit different than normal. Normally, week after week, I make it my aim to open up the scriptures, focus on one passage or section, and to try to unpack what that has to say for us. Today, I'm kind of taking a broader approach and using this time to kind of outline things that I believe Scripture is all underneath, but I'm not spelling it out every step of the way. I'm trying to summarize on behalf of the elders where we feel like God is taking us, what He wants us to focus on. So this sermon's a little bit different, but just to make you aware of that. The elders have spent a lot of time this summer thinking, praying, reading, discussing together about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going as a church. And so in order to explain the purpose of the message today and the fact that we're having a Vision Sunday, I feel like I need to explain a little bit about what we mean by vision, explain how a vision statement is different from other meaningful statements like a mission statement or something like that, and explain how I hope that our vision statement will impact our ministry in the years to come. So what do we mean by vision? What we mean is by vision is a compelling picture of where we would like to be in the future. Now, the purpose of a vision statement is to state as clearly and concisely as possible where we're going, what we'd like to accomplish, where we'd like to end up down the road. And that's different from something like a mission statement. A mission statement is a summary of our overall purpose or our ultimate goal. So our mission statement here at Calvary Baptist Church, maybe I should put people on the spot and see how many could say it off the top of our heads, but our mission here at Calvary Baptist Church is to glorify God by knowing Him, treasuring Him, and offering Him to the world. That's why we're here. Ultimately, we exist on planet Earth to glorify God. He's made us for His glory. And as a church, we see three primary means of God being glorified in and through us. By us knowing Him, and that knowing should build up to treasuring Him, and that treasuring Him should spill over into offering Him to the world. That's why we're here. We adopted that mission statement roughly 5 or 6 years ago, I believe. And I think it does a good job of stating our overall purpose. And we want this statement to glorify God by knowing Him, treasuring Him, offering Him to the world, to be kind of the one primary guiding principle for everything that we do as a church, so that hopefully everything in some way is seeking to fulfill and carry out that mission. But having said that, one of the things that we've recognized over the last 5 or 6 years is that it can sometimes be difficult to bring that mission statement down to the everyday decisions that we make as individuals and as a church, to spell out exactly what that means, practically speaking. What practical changes do we hope to make in order to accomplish our mission more effectively? What would it look like if we were excelling in accomplishing our mission? How do we know that we're doing well? Questions like these haven't always had easy, direct, obvious answers. And a vision statement, one of the main purposes of a vision statement is to try to flesh out the mission statement by describing the steps that we think the church most needs to take in order to effectively carry out that mission. We hope our vision statement will give a clearer picture of what we think it will look like for our church to carry out its mission. Now, I know that there are some people, I have spoken to a number of them and have been one myself at times, who don't maybe feel any particular craving for a precise vision. They recognize that to some extent the church will always be juggling a number of various biblical priorities like preaching and teaching, fellowship, prayer, evangelism, discipleship, mutual encouragement, benevolence and support for those in need, the equipping, sending, and supporting of evangelists and missionaries. The list could go on. These are all directives and goals for the church. Any church that's trying to be faithful to the scriptures knows that there are a number of things that we are commanded to pursue. And so to some extent, we should always preserve some type of balance of all of these things. And there are some people who just feel like, well, we're supposed to be doing a bunch of all good things, and so that's what we do. We do a bunch of all good things, and they don't feel any particular craving for a vision statement that narrows it. But I know a number of people feel that in light of such a buffet of good things that we should be doing, say, well, what's best? How do we narrow down from the good to the best, or the most pressing, or the most important right now? How do we narrow down to what we really need to focus on now? If you've ever walked into your house when it's a disaster zone, you know that sometimes it can be like, there's lots of stuff to do. Where do I begin? What's most important? Where do we start? And I feel like a vision statement is trying to do that to some extent. We're not saying that all of these other things that aren't in the vision are therefore completely unimportant and negligible. Not at all. We're simply saying, of all the good things that we ought to be doing, these we feel are most foundational, most time-sensitive, most pressing for right now, most important. They're the key pieces of the puzzle, which if we do them, so many of the other things that we ought to do will fall into place behind them. Just last week, I wrapped up a sermon series on the life of David. If you've been with us all summer, we've been looking at David's life together week after week. And last week, as I wrapped up this series on the life of David, we saw that David's driving ambition, his ultimate kind of passion in life was to see God worshipped and treasured and honored and prized as infinitely valuable and precious. We see that in the Psalms. We see that in the decisions he makes as king of Israel. That was his grand mission in life. But he understood that under that mission, like, okay, so I want to see God worshipped, treasured, prized, adored. Well, what do I do? How do I narrow that down? What does God most specifically want me to do in order to accomplish that mission? And so he felt specifically called by God to pursue a few key tasks, and most of it revolved around the establishment of the temple. He felt like God wanted him to pursue the building of the temple. He wanted to build it himself until God made clear, nope, that's not for you. Your son Solomon will build the temple. But David didn't just say, okay, then that's it, I'm done with it. He said, okay, well, what can I do to most help my son move this thing forward? And so David sketched out architectural plans. He wrote up kind of a hierarchy and list of responsibilities for the priesthood, and he led the fundraising effort to get all the resources necessary for the temple. Out of all the things David could have done to promote the worship of God, he kind of focused in on the things that he felt were most critical. His vision clarified what he would do by narrowing his focus to the tasks most critical to accomplishing his mission. And that's how the elders hope that our vision statement will function for us as a church. There will always be things that we do, that we ought to do, that may not be explicitly stated in the vision statement. For example, our vision doesn't specifically mention biblical preaching and teaching or lively Christ-exalting praise and worship. It's not because we don't think those things are important. It's because we feel like right now those are relative strengths for us as a church. We care about them. We'll continue to care about them. We're going to continue pursuing them. So what we're trying to articulate with a vision is, what are the things that we feel weakest in or that deserve the most attention, focus, effort in order to grow as a church. So with that all kind of behind us, the elders have identified three key areas that we feel are most important to strengthen in order to move forward as a church. That's Christ-centered community, leadership development, and evangelism. Christ-centered community, leadership development, and evangelism. And for each of these three areas, we've tried to focus in on one concise, specific sentence for each of them to kind of as succinctly summarize our desire as much as possible, and then we're going to unpack and explain what we mean by the different words to kind of flesh out that statement. And our hope is that this is something that will go on our website, that will be a guiding principle for our leadership, for the decisions we make with our budget, for what ministries we pursue or cut or whatever. We hope that this clarifies how to best use our time, energy, resources moving forward. So first, Christ-centered community. Our statement is this: we endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. We endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. And we chose the word endeavor as opposed to we want Christ-centered community, or we long for Christ-centered community, or we hope that there will be Christ-centered community. But we will endeavor, because that's an active word. We will earnestly strive and exert effort and energy and persistence into becoming a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. We determine to not be passive, hoping that by merely showing up and being in proximity to other people, that somehow meaningful, in-depth, Christ-centered community will just spontaneously happen around us. Anyone who's, I'm sure lots of us at different times in our lives have experienced times where you can go to church week after week after week and still feel like, I don't feel like I really know people. I don't feel like I'm really connected. I feel like I can recognize some faces, but God created the church for more than just recognizing some faces. He created the church that we would be a family, that we would be connected, that there would be meaningful, vibrant, Christ-centered community in our midst. And so we must endeavor to do that. We can't just sit back and hope that that somehow comes our way. As elders, we see four key I words, words that start with the letter I, that we think capture what we mean by endeavor. And the first one is initiative. We will take initiative. The only way our church will ever grow in its sense of community and the bond between us is by every person beginning to take initiative. Community is what happens when people take initiative. If you feel alone or disconnected or discouraged or whatever it might be, if that's you, then maybe someone around you will spend all their time reaching out to you. But it starts with us seeking community. We can't just wait for someone to kind of pursue us. Are we going to be people that pursue community around us? What can we do? And specifically, under taking initiative, we see three I words that we think flesh that out. That is inviting, including, and investing. We take initiative by inviting, by including, and by investing in the people around us. As a church, I would love to see a culture created here at Calvary where we don't wait for some church fellowship event before we decide whether it fits into our schedule and whether or not we will connect with other people in the church. But we simply reach out and invite people to join us in doing whatever it is we want to do. You feel like going to the beach? Then take initiative and invite someone to come along with you as you go to the beach. If someone hears that you're going, do your best to try to include them. Inviting, including. I'd love to see our church get to the point where we hardly need formal fellowship events in order to get people together, because everyone is doing such a good job of inviting and including and investing. I'm going to put someone on the spot just to highlight something just lately about this. Jim Coffey, where's Jim? Yeah, hi, Jim. Hi, good to see you. Just trying to draw attention to you. Just a week ago, over Labor Day weekend, Jim brought a group of people hiking with him. It wasn't a formal, there was nothing in the bulletin. This wasn't like a big formal church organized event. He just said, I want to go hiking. Who wants to go with me? And for several weeks leading up to it, hey, anyone he thought might have an interest in hiking, he'd reach out and he'd invite people. And I don't bring this up so you're feeling, oh no, he didn't invite me. He doesn't care about me. No, we can't invite everyone to everything that we ever do, but it starts with simply taking initiative with someone, with a group of people, whatever it is. And he's just like, all right, who wants to go? Come along. And they had 5 or 6 people, and they did this marathon 9-mile hike through the mountains in New Hampshire. And you can't hike for 9 hours or however many hours it took. You can't hike you spend a whole day hiking and driving up and back without some type of community forming, without some relationships deepening. I'm sure the group that went know each other better. They're more connected. They're more likely to say, hey, how's it going? We talked about this. How's that? Any update on your life? Like, simply inviting people and including them in what you're doing is one of the best ways for community to happen. And you can do this with almost anything. You want to try a new restaurant? Invite someone to go along. You want to bring your kids to the playground? Shoot a text to a group of families to see if anyone's available. Some things will be last minute. Some things will be planned more in advance. But if we have a culture of inviting and including and then investing with the people that we're next to, we don't need any formal, fancy, structured events. And there's still value to that to help cultivate this in the church. And we're going to continue to do church events that facilitate these kinds of things, but increasingly we'd love to see just every person in the church taking initiative by inviting, including, and investing. So one specific thing on this that I think about, we did this 2 years ago leading up to my sabbatical. I was away for the summer and we were trying to think, what can we do as a church to help basically to help the church be more ready for my absence for 2.5 months. And so one of the things that we encouraged for a number of months leading up to that was to invite at least one person or one family or one group of people, whatever it is. It can be as small as one person, but one person, family group, over to your house for a meal or take them out to a restaurant at least once a month. If everyone in the church could make it a habit and say, I'm going to commit to that, that's a pretty doable pace. One person or one family or one group of people that you invite over for a meal at your house or that you take out somewhere and treat them to some meal out somewhere. If every member in the church did that once a month, I think that single change alone would have a profound impact on the connectedness, on how well we know each other, on how invested we are in each other's lives. And so I want to encourage that to be one specific thing that we can do, but certainly I want us to think about going beyond that to just living everyday life in a way that we draw people into what we're doing. We rub shoulders with them and you just encourage and build them up along the way. So all of that is wrapped up into endeavor. We endeavor to be a church characterized by. We say that because we don't simply want community to be something felt by those on the inside, but something that's obvious, that's visible, that anyone walking in our building, anyone bumping into a handful of us out and about town, whatever it is, that they can't help but see something different about us, something about the bond and the connection and the love and the support that we show to one another. We want all of our interactions to be characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. When people visit, we want them to be so welcomed and embraced and encouraged that they tangibly experience the very hospitality of Christ, who loves people as they are, but loves them too much to leave them as they are. Are we going to be the kind of church where anyone who walks in our doors feels embraced, feels welcomed, feels included in the way that Christ did? I think the best welcoming is the welcoming of Christ that says, I love you as you are, but I love you too much to leave you as you are. So let's grow together. I hope we're that kind of welcoming church. We want our children to grow up in a church family that loves them all as if they were your own kids. And to some extent they are. Like we are, God entrusts children to us, but it takes a village to raise a child. There's truth to that. It takes a church, and we gather around and have a sense of ownership over each other's children so that they grow up with just so many godly influences and examples. And is that going to be the experience of our kids here? We want every member to feel like this is a place where they belong and are known and are needed. From the visitor to the child to the member to the stranger who bumps into us out in the streets, we want our bond of fellowship to be so strong and visible and countercultural that it forces people to take notice. Will that be us 5 years from now? I hope so. And one of the things that Jesus says in John 17 that reminds us that Christ-centered community, leadership development, and evangelism, they all overlap and spill over into each other. Because in John 17, Jesus prays for those who would come to believe in him through the message of his disciples. So he's praying for us. And he prays, he says, may they be brought to complete unity to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. So he's saying, may the church be so unified that people will see us and know that Christ was sent of God and that God loves them even as he loves Jesus Christ. It's our unity that communicates that. Our unity is a critical part of our evangelism. One of the most evangelistic things we can do is to demonstrate tangibly with one another the love of Christ. And as we do that in this Christ-centered community, that witnesses, the very support we show to one another witnesses to the people around us. So we endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful Christ-centered community. If our church is made up of people indwelt by the Holy Spirit who gives spiritual life and vitality, then we want to see our relationships with each other marked by that same type of life and vitality. Our hope is that every person at CBC feeling weak or discouraged or weary would have no shortage of people to turn to for prayer and encouragement and comfort and support, and that our relationships and interactions would be life-giving and strengthening us to press on. We all need that. If you've ever had to go through a trial without that kind of support, it's not a good place to be. Let's be a church where no one in our body, no one in this group ever needs to go through a challenge alone and unsupported, but that our community would be so strong and life-giving that it kind of buttresses us up. It supports us. It lifts us up through such times. We endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. By meaningful, we mean specifically relationships that are real and honest and authentic, which move beyond merely surface-level interactions and conversations to address the issues of substance that really matter in our lives. Will this be a community where you let people in, so to speak? Or are you going to keep everyone at arm's length, hanging out with them, but not really letting anyone in to see and support you and help you with what really matters in life? The elders have been working on a number of metrics that we think can help us to gauge, to track, to keep an eye on the progress and growth that we're experiencing as a church as it relates to our vision statement. And some things are more obvious and easy to measure, like the percentage of people involved in a small group or something like that. We'd love to see 80% of people involved in a small group in our church. That's a very trackable number, but some things are harder to track. And one of the things that we'd like to do to try to help with that, hopefully within a month or two, we should have finalized for us kind of a church survey or questionnaire of sorts that we'll encourage everyone to fill out that essentially gives a snapshot for where we're at. And that can be a way to gauge, if we average kind of the answers and the responses in the church, we can see over time whether things are deepening or not. And specifically about, meaningful relationships, two questions that I would like to put on that questionnaire are, number one, if you're feeling weak, discouraged, weary, or if you're struggling with a particular challenge or temptation on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how likely are you to reach out to someone else at Calvary Baptist Church? If you're really down, do you have people that you can reach out to, that you're likely to reach out to? And if so, a follow-up question, how many people in the church do you feel close enough to open up to about such things? 1, 2, 5, 25, or I doubt that anyone's quite to that level, or you're just an open book and you'll share anything with anyone, that's fine too. But are we going to be a place where we're letting people in, where there are meaningful relationships that deal with the stuff of life and how critical that is? And we want to try to find ways to gauge whether we're moving forward in that as a church. Our hope is that we would get to the point where everyone, I think of that like 3 o'clock in the morning, it's kind of a good way to filter something. If something happens and it's 3 in the morning, do you have people that you feel comfortable calling? And I hope that we would get to the point as a church where every person would be able to say, yes, without a doubt, I have people that I can go to at a time like that about something that really matters, and I know that they're going to be there for me. I pray that would be us as a church, and that's what we're endeavoring to pursue. We endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, and lastly, Christ-centered community. And we believe this is the most critical, the most important piece of the community we long to see at CBC. Fellowship, that word in Greek that often is translated fellowship or partnership in the New Testament, is the Greek word koinonia. Kind of a fancy term, but it means, or it's describing inner unity around a shared purpose expressed through outward partnership. Fellowship in the biblical sense of the word is inner unity, so it's a bunch of people with a shared heart for something that's expressed, that's around a shared purpose expressed through outward partnership, which means that fellowship is not merely hanging out, but pursuing a goal together. We're aiming at something together. We're linking arms in our effort to glorify God by knowing Him, treasuring Him, and offering Him to the world. And in this way, Christ-centered community points to the purpose and the direction of our fellowship. We're connected together around Christ and for Christ. One of the things that I've noticed over the last number of years is that I think a lot of us know how to be friends with other Christians. Like there's nothing particularly complicated about that you're a Christian and you have friends that are Christians and you know how to be friends. But I feel like there's a lot of people who don't know how to have distinctively Christ-centered friendships. Because there's a difference between being a friend with a Christian and having a Christian friendship. Having a distinctively Christ-centered friendship where there is something unique and distinct about how you interact that differentiates it from any other friendship out there in the world. And I don't think Christ-centered friendships means that we can only talk about the Bible when we're together, Don't talk about the Patriots, what does Galatians say? That's not what I mean by distinctively Christ-centered community. You can talk about the stuff of life. We ought to. We're not living in some ivory tower disconnected from the lowly lives that other people lead. And yet is the bulk or is all of our interaction with other Christians of the same nature that it would be with people who don't have Christ in common with us? Is there anything distinctively different? Is there, as Paul says, are our conversations seasoned with salt? Is it like grace sprinkling into our interactions in such a way that we consistently find ourselves leaving such interactions built up and encouraged and kind of like that, do you have that experience in your interaction with other Christian friends? And our hope is, because I think a lot of people haven't quite figured that out yet, like what it means to have a distinctively Christ-centered friendship, I hope that the church is a training ground for that. I hope that our small groups are places where we learn how to have distinctively Christ-centered friendships. I would imagine, here, let me just do a little audience participation. How many of you can think of a friendship with another Christian, which if you were to jump into a focused conversation about the gospel or about your faith, it would feel kind of awkward because you don't do that regularly with them? Anyone willing to admit that you have friendships with other Christians that that it would feel a little weird to let's read the Bible together and talk about it? Okay, I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to do that, but we just don't do that. That's not kind of a part of what we do together. I pray that the church is a place where we learn to do that. Not in a forced, awkward way, but everything is awkward before it's comfortable, right? It's just the nature of life. Everything is awkward before it comes easily. And I pray that we work out some of those kinks in community here where we learn how to have distinctively Christ-centered friendships. So we endeavor to be a church characterized by vibrant, meaningful, Christ-centered community. A second, leadership development. Here's our statement. We endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping and empowering people for kingdom work here and around the world. We endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping and empowering people for kingdom work here and around the world. We say multiplies because our aim is not merely to produce leaders, but to multiply leaders, to so invest in people, not only that they are able to lead, but that they are able to make more leaders. And there's a difference. It's one thing to get someone to a point where they can lead others, but you have to do more investing in them for them to be at a point where they can not only lead, but raise up new leaders. And that's what we want to be pursuing is, developing leaders who are able to develop leaders who are able to develop leaders ad infinitum. One of the primary jobs of a leader must be to make more leaders. And this is something that lately at our executive committee meetings among our deacons that we've been emphasizing a lot lately, and we're going to continue to do that. And so for anyone else who might be in some kind of leadership capacity here at the church, maybe you're leading a small group, maybe you're heading up a ministry team, maybe whatever, maybe you're a deacon, or maybe there's some other capacity that's unofficial, but you tend to be someone who takes initiative among a group of people to do things together. And if that's the case, we want to continue to emphasize the importance of not just doing ministry, not simply leading people, but raising up and equipping and empowering new leaders. Aubrey Malphurs and Will Mancini have written a book called Building Leaders, and they write this. They say, the job of a leader isn't just to enlist more followers, but to recruit and equip more and better leaders. It's the leader's responsibility to develop other leaders. Followers don't develop leaders, they follow them. It's leaders who develop leaders. If they don't do it, it won't get done. And just like David at the end of his life, and Paul at the end of his life is thinking about who's going to carry on this message after he goes. And Paul writes this to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. He says, the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. And there we see 4 generations of leaders mentioned. There's Paul writing to Timothy, telling Timothy to find reliable men who are then capable of teaching others. And that's the kind of leadership we want to see. Paul investing into Timothy, Timothy investing into reliable men, these people investing into others. And we want that to be the culture of our church, that we don't simply do ministry. We're constantly looking to bring people along with us, to rub shoulders, to model for them what this looks like, to equip them, which continuing forward, moving forward. So we endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders. I just want to pause for a second on leaders. Leaders are simply people who influence others toward the accomplishment of a purpose. And by leaders, we're not thinking exclusively of those qualified and competent to lead small groups or ministry teams or committees, but anyone with the maturity and skills necessary to positively influence people around them. You don't need a title to be a leader, but you do need maturity and wisdom and some knowledge and certain skills. And we want to be a church that's always on the hunt for people who are looking to grow in their leadership. Not everyone is meant to be a leader, and it's okay to state that. I mean, to some extent, you might be a leader. If you're a parent, to some extent, you're a leader in the home. You might be, all of us are leaders in some small way, but broadly speaking, not all of us are called to step up and oversee or guide a bunch of people. But we want to be a church that is always looking to develop leaders so that anyone interested in growing would have no shortage of opportunities to do so. And that we'd always be looking for people with leadership potential that we might be able to invest and develop them to be all that they can be. We endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping. By equipping, we're thinking primarily of the process by which people gain knowledge, skills, and spiritual maturity necessary to lead well. So there might be formal things like teaching, seminars, conferences, opportunities that we provide as a church. It involves mentoring and modeling for someone what it looks like, so bringing them alongside you and demonstrating what good leadership looks like. Provides hands-on opportunities. So whether through formal things, or I think the majority of leadership training is informal. It's just one-on-one. You're just bringing someone along with you. This thing that you could do by yourself. I'm going to put someone else on the spot. Dennis Fertiev, a couple weeks ago, he's the head of our buildings and properties. And the screen door on the parsonage where I live next door was falling apart and it wasn't working. And the wood was all coming out and everything. And so he came over. But rather than just doing it himself, I mean, he has the skills where he could have pulled it off alone. But he brought in Michael Weckel, my brother-in-law. And they kind of tag team together. And yes, it got the work done faster, but there's a sense in which there is sharpening, there's building up, like this thing that you could do by yourself. By bringing someone along with you, the church is built up more and leaders are developed. And so whatever ministry you're in here at the church, I want to encourage you to think about who are people that you can draw in alongside you to work with you so that we do this thing and we're building up each other along the way rather than just we got to get stuff done. But it's how can we view pouring into others as the primary thing and, let's fix a door while we're at it. Or, let's do this other thing while we're at it. But the primary aim in what we're doing is investing in and pouring into people. So we endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping and empowering. By empowering, we mean entrusting people with authority to lead. It's one thing for someone to be equipped. It's another for them to be empowered. That's essentially the point where you say, all right, here you go for it. And there's oversight and there's follow-up and things like that. But it's basically, to go back to Malfers and Mancini in the book that they wrote, they talk about empowerment is the point in the leadership development process where a leader stops juggling one of his balls and hands it to someone else, an emerging juggler, so to speak, and says, okay, you've got this one. Work on that. Empowerment is when we start delegating and handing over responsibility to do things. And we need to be a church, and I'm trying to model this from the top down, that we don't cling to our responsibility like, no, this pulpit is mine. Nobody comes in this pulpit. But are we going to be people that says this thing that is your responsibility, are you going to cling to it for your own self-promotion, or are you going to gladly, as people are ready and as they're growing, empower them to get experience and to step up, and the job may not be done as well. It's not bragging or boasting to say, I've been preaching for a while. If someone is preaching their first sermon, it may not be as good as someone who's preached 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 sermons, but you got to start somewhere, and we need to be a church that's ready to give those kinds of opportunities to others. We endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping and empowering people for kingdom work here and around the world. We wanted to state this explicitly because we feel it's important to be so focused on God's mission to bring people into relationship with himself that we rejoice at the privilege of raising up leaders, even if we don't get to benefit from their leadership here at Calvary Baptist Church. Are we going to resent the college students and the seminarians that we pour into for 3 or 4 years and then send them off? Or are we going to go, oh, that was a waste of time. They're not even sticking around. Let's stop doing that. Or are we going to be the kind of people that says God has called us to be an equipping and sending and releasing church, and we rejoice whether our church is built up from that or some other church somewhere or some other country somewhere. You know, Mike and Jenny Schultz are in the process of going to Indonesia, and I hope we don't go, oh man, we're spending all this time with them and they're going to be, 5,000 miles away. It's like, no, this is kingdom work. Are we going to rejoice more in the kingdom or in our little territory? I hope we have such a kingdom mindset that we rejoice at the privilege of pouring into people, whether they stick around or not. It's about God's kingdom work, not about this little church here. It's about more than that. So it's important that we want to endeavor to be a church that effectively multiplies leaders by equipping and empowering people for kingdom work here and around the world. Third, evangelism. We endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God and on board with God's mission that we effectively live out and share the gospel in every sphere of life. We want to be a church made up of people so in love with God. And I want to start with that, so in love with God. Because it's easy looking at vision statements like this and thinking, boy, there's a lot of stuff we got to do. We got to do this and we got to do that. And the heart of all of it, like if you go into a mindset of I got to do, but you're not tending to the furnace that produces the energy and heat to do everything you need to do, then you are going to burn up and burn out. What drives the engine of the church is worship. It's treasuring God. And so we want to state that explicitly. We endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God, which is what our mission statement kind of points to. There's an arc to our mission statement from we glorify God by knowing him, which builds up to treasuring him, which then spills over into offering him. And that's what we have in mind here with so in love with God, because it's the treasuring God, the seeing God as beautiful, as praiseworthy, as awesome, that makes us go, how can I make sure other people get to know this God? This God that has transformed my life, how can I not want other people to know him? If you try to do evangelism from a mindset or a heart other than love for God, then you're just going to crash and burn sooner or later. It all flows out of love for God, and if you pull that away, everything collapses. So we endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God and on board with God's mission. God is a missionary God who created people that we might know him and treasure him and trust him. And that fellowship was broken by sin. And the rest of history has been the story of God doing things to overcome that separation, to draw us back into relationship with him. Through promises, through prophets, through miracles, through the sacrificial system in the Old Testament was all pointing forward to the ultimate sacrifice, Christ himself coming to be the means by which that sin gets dealt with and that we might be drawn back into a relationship with God himself. God is a missionary God who has persistently taken initiative to draw us in. Jesus was a missionary who left his comfortable homeland to come to foreign soil that the people there might be able to have a relationship with God through him. I've heard it said that the church doesn't have a mission, but God's mission has a church. And that mission is primary. It's not that the church is primary and, let's have something to do since we're going to be here. But it's God has a mission, and he's created the church for the execution of that mission. The mission is primary. And we exist to that all nations and people and tongue and tribe might come to know Jesus Christ, that they might have the hope of an eternity spent with him. That's why we're here. So we endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God and on board with God's mission that we effectively live out and share the gospel. Now, the live out and the share the gospel go hand in hand. We wanted to specify the live out because we want to be a church that demonstrates in our actions the truth of the gospel, just as we explain with our words the truth of the gospel. In Galatians 2, Paul talks about living in line with the truth of the gospel, that there's a line to the gospel, and our lives either line up with the gospel or our lives are in contradiction to the gospel. And so it's important that we live out the gospel, that our choices, our actions, the things that we do are demonstrating the gospel. The gospel is good news which must be shared, but it's news with implications for how we live. Forgiving as we've been forgiven, showing grace as we've been shown grace, loving as we've been loved, sacrificing and giving ourselves because Jesus gave and sacrificed himself for us. We want to be a church that demonstrates the gospel. But not just demonstrates in our actions, there needs to be explanation. So we endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God and on board with God's mission that we effectively live out and share the gospel. I've said before that actions speak louder than words, but actions and words speak louder than just actions. So we want to be people that in our actions demonstrate the gospel, but not just stop there. There's a popular mindset today that has taken the statement and attributed it to St. Francis of Assisi, though he never said it. And the statement has been popularized. It says, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. And we kind of go, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, preach the gospel in your life. Yeah. And like, there's like a part of that that's true, but there's a sense in which if all you do is live the gospel and there's never an explanation of the gospel, the good news that motivates the actions that you're showing, then people are going to go, wow, that's a really nice guy. Or, wow, isn't she generous? Or, wow, boy, they're just really friendly people. It's the gospel that makes them go, oh, there's a reason behind the love, behind the generosity, behind the sacrifice. And so, yes, we demonstrate the gospel, but let us be a people that are not only demonstrating, but explaining and sharing and communicating the gospel. And so we want to be a church that provides more and more opportunities for you to know how to most effectively share and communicate and explain. And we're all going to be at different stages in our development of this, and it's okay to say, just come to church, and my pastor will say, like that's a place to start, but that is not like the end point of like, just go and he'll do the work for me. It's like, no, like let's learn to be people that can explain, that can try to communicate. So we want to both live and share the gospel. And then we say in every sphere of life. In every sphere of life. We want to be a church that gathers for the encouragement and for edification and worship, but then goes back out into the world on mission. Wanting to be used of God to reach family and friends and co-workers and neighbors. J.D. Greear is an author who wrote a book recently, and he imagines the following scenario, which I think is particularly appropriate as a football season is kicking off this week. He says, imagine watching a football game on TV where after the quarterback calls the play in the huddle, the team applauds him, pats him on the back, and then runs back to the bench to have Gatorade and snacks. After a few minutes, they hustle back out into the field, huddle back up, and tell the quarterback to call another play. This time, a few tell him he's the best play caller they've ever heard, and then they plan to bring their friends back to hear him call the next play, then back to the bench for more snacks. A few podcast his play and listen to it again while they munch on energy bars. A few minutes later, back out to listen to another play. This happens for the duration of the first quarter. At some point, you yell in exasperation, "Fellas, the point is not listening to the quarterback call the play. The point is to run the play." The Sunday gathering of the church is like a huddle where instructions are given for how the players can run the mission play throughout the week. We gather for strength, for encouragement, for direction and motivation, but the whole point is to leave here bringing the gospel to bear on every sphere of life. We leave as missionaries on mission with God. That's the point of the church. A place when you're wounded to be cared for and built back up so that you can go back out to the mission field. Now, we might not all be going cross-culturally to people of other languages and things like that, but we all go back out into whatever sphere of life we're in, our workplace, our neighborhood, and it's important to see the church as the equipping, refueling point, the huddle from which we go back out and run the play. So we endeavor to be a church made up of people so in love with God and on board with God's mission that we effectively live out and share the gospel in every sphere of life. There's a lot that we could say, and I'm going to start to wrap things up here. We can't spell out every implication of our vision, every possible thing that we'd like to change. We're going to be working that out in the months and years to come, and there's going to be a Q&A downstairs as part of the fellowship time afterwards where we can answer follow-up questions about this vision. But there's a couple things I want to say before I wrap up. Two implications that I think we need to be prepared for as a church as it relates to this vision. Growth and opposition. Growth and opposition. Growth. In the past, I feel, I've had a feeling from many people, and perhaps I felt it myself at times, that intellectually we want the church to grow. Like in our heads we say, yes, growth is good. That's more people coming to know Christ. But if you're honest with yourself, maybe you're someone here who deep down has had these moments where you kind of say, yeah, well, growth is good, but deep down I kind of hope it doesn't grow because I kind of like things the way that they are, and I don't want to be like one of those big churches where you don't know anyone. So yeah, I hope we grow, but I really hope we don't grow. I don't know if you felt that tension or that dynamic in your heart. Certainly every size of church has unique challenges associated with a church that size. And without a doubt, it's easier to get lost in the crowd in big churches. Having said that, Jesus never told us to make disciples of all nations unless doing so would uncomfortably stretch the size of our present gathering. It should be our mission that unifies us rather than our current level of comfort or familiarity. We feel it's okay, and I guess I just want to state this explicitly. As elders, it's okay to want to grow, but we want to be clear that growth is not our primary goal, but secondary. Health is our primary goal. Being the church that God has called us to be is our primary goal. And if we are healthy, we think that we will grow. That's what healthy organisms do. They grow. So we're aiming for health, but we want to say it's okay to grow, and there are good things about growth, and we want to do everything we can as we grow to fight against some of the temptations that might be more readily there for us as we grow. So number one, a couple things we want to do to fight against those tendencies. Number one, we'd like to be a church that moves towards church planting. We don't want this particular gathering to grow so indefinitely that every however X number of years we just keep needing bigger buildings, and we're just going to keep larger sanctuaries and things like that. We think it's unrealistic to plan too distantly into the future, but our desire for 5 years from now is to either have a church plant established or a team preparing to start a church. And some funds set aside to help that get off to a good start. That's where we want to be 5 years from now. And many don't realize that Calvary Baptist Church has been a church planting church. Every Sunday afternoon, Slavic Evangelical Baptist Church meets here, and that was started in the mid-90s as this influx of immigrants from the former Soviet Union were coming to the United States, and the leaders of Calvary Baptist Church, who at one point we were the Russian Baptist Church at Peabody, we said, well, let's do something to accommodate and to provide a congregation for these immigrants that are coming in. And so we were critical in helping establish the Slavic church that meets in the afternoon. That's been 20 years or so since that's happened, and I think our church right now doesn't have an identity as a church planting church, but I'd like us to be thinking and moving in that direction. In the next 5 years, we'd also like to see resources begin to build that might enable a more substantial project to address the limits of this facility. We don't know yet whether that means a remodel or an addition or a relocation. We're going to be researching and thinking about those things in the years to come. But we want to start aiming in that direction, in part by preparing ourselves financially, building up something that could help to execute an addition or remodel or relocation. So we want to be preparing for that, and we want to be doing the research to be ready to execute that when the time is right. We expect growth and we expect opposition. Opposition, number one, spiritual opposition from Satan, who would love to see this church get divided, get derailed, lose sight of what God has for us. And so we want to be ready for that, which is why starting tomorrow evening and for the 72 hours following, we're kicking off this time of this kind of new vision by trying to pray it through. And so we're spending 72 hours of prayer and fasting for where God is taking us as a church. And now whether you do like the fast whole hog, you're like just water, for 3 days, good for you. If you want to do a juice fast, if you want to, the sheet that's in your bulletin has some information on different types of fasts. And if your health is such that you can't, then that's fine. But join us in prayer, dedicating time to pray for this church and where God is taking us. There are sign-ups that you can do after the service today, and we want you to sign up for some time slots and come tomorrow night at 7 o'clock and Thursday night at 7 o'clock as we kick off and end that 72-hour time of prayer. We want to be ready to fight against whatever spiritual opposition might come our way. But secondly, I want us to be prepared for personal opposition. I can see how if someone has their own personal agenda for where they'd like the church to go, and this vision doesn't seem to line up with your personal agenda, I could see how easily there could be division or murmurings or something. And if you're just saying, like, look, I want us to be a church that's moving in an entirely different direction, then I say talk to me or talk to the elders. This is where we're going. This is what we feel like God is calling us to as a church, and we want to be a church united and on board with that. And so wherever there is disagreement or different ideas about how we execute that, we're going to have lots of conversations in the days and months and years to come about execution. But let's be people that try to talk that out. And if you're just not on board, then I would say find another church that you can be on board with rather than stick around to always be a wrench in the works trying to derail us from the vision that God is taking us down. That's why we're here. We want to grow in our Christ-centered community, in our leadership development, in our evangelism, and I pray that you are excited about that and are ready to work that out with us in the days to come. There's going to be more time for Q&A after the service, and obviously lots more times to talk through this. I'm going to close us in a word of prayer. Father God, I thank you. I thank you for the grace that you have shown this church for so many years, as we're about a year and a half out from our 100th anniversary as a church. God, you've been good. You've been faithful that we would have this place to gather in, that we would be your people with diverse backgrounds gathered together to seek your face together. And I thank you for that. And we just call upon you for the grace to press on, to move forward. Help us to not run ahead of you or to lag behind you, but to be right on your heels as you lead this church. We love and we thank you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.